Welcome, humanities students, colleagues, visitors to our beautiful campus. I'm Dr. Innovators from the Department of Art and Art History, and I'm also the coordinator for Humanities 214. So for those of you who are Humanities 214 students, this is our third and final of the shared experiences in the semester. We had 2 experiences with Humanities 104 students, very engaging African and Indigenous workshop with Aram Han Sifuentes, and then a great panel of Indigenous ways of knowing with Bresler Family and his grandmother and faculty for Maria Chiapas. So today we are sharing once again, and this time with again some Humanities 104 students and new today Humanities 414 students. So welcome to you. We have a wonderful collaboration for you with the Center for Craft, bringing together present, past, local, global, with 2 visual artists who will be introduced by the Center for Craft. So now good. Before we start, a couple of things. For one, I have just quick requests and reminders. The request is please turn off any device that makes a noise, especially phones. Now would be a really good time to check that it's and for those of you who are in Humanities 214, a quick reminder, next week, Wednesday, we are on Thanksgiving break, so there's no lecture. Our last lecture is the following week, and that will be that in the long days. So last but not least, before we get started, and very important, a few things. There are quite a few people who made today's event possible, and a couple of larger structures. So let's start with the bigger institutional structures, the Peace Center here at UNC and the Humanities program, as well as the Center for Craft downtown. Thank you for all that you've done to make this work. And then there are a few people that I want to highlight that have really been pulling extra weight to get this going. And one of them is Tori Anderson. She's here. Thank you, Tori. And then we have all behind the scenes people who are making sure technology and everything is working. And here I want to thank Kevin Fuller over there with the cameras. And Bresler and then I have fabulous text, Neil. Thank you so much. So now, without further ado, please help me welcome Melanie.
Thanks, Dr. Bears, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's program, Craft Research Talks Community, Tradition, and Culture at UNC Asheville Humanities College Lecture. I'm Melanie Gibbons, Grant Program Manager of Research and Ideas for the Center for Craft, a national nonprofit that increases access to craft by empowering and resourcing artists, organizations, and communities through our grants, fellowships, and programs that bring people together. We believe that craft matters. Since 2005, the Center has annually funded researchers, scholars, artists, curators, and organizations in support of scholarly craft research in the United States through the Craft Research Fund. In 2022, social practice and 5 artists, writer and educator Aram Han Sifuentes received a Craft Research Fund Artist Fellowship to travel to Chiapas, Mexico, to work with 12 Indigenous artisanas to understand the function of garments and textiles in the area and learn the practice of abstract art. In conjunction with today's program, Aram's research will be presented in the exhibition Preservers, Innovators, and Rescuers of Chiapas and Rescuers of Culture in Chiapas, opening this Friday at the Center for Craft. I hope we can be there. Similar to the exhibition, today's discussion will address the interconnections of culture and craft practices by drawing together questions around identity, diaspora, knowledge transmission, and material resources. And with that, it's my pleasure to turn the mic over to Aram and Louise.
Hello. My name is Luis Salvador. I'm going to be hearing conversations with Aram. I'm going to introduce myself a little bit more fully and a little bit on my practice, and then I'm going to hand over the mic to Aram. And we're going to engage in a, hopefully relaxed and interesting conversation around traditions, craft, and our art practice. So, as I already mentioned, my name is Luis Salvador Salamunio. Soy hijo de María y José, nieto de Gloria, Rosario, y Guadalupe. I just wanted to take a time to honor my ancestors and the really strong and powerful women in my life that have shaped who I am. I do think, my practice changes. I'm always thinking about like what it is that I'm doing in the studio and the objects that I make, and I think, like academically, I'll say that, I'm interdisciplinary. I work with a lot of different materials. I believe that materials have different inherited meaning that I like to play around with. And I work in the sense of traditions. Instead of working in traditions, I work with traditions. I'm interested in what it means to find out who I am and how I function in this world through materiality and traditions, but then also like carve out new paths for myself and maybe for our culture. Like a lot to say, but I try to do that. I'll tell you though that in a non-academic way, usually I'm always striving for a feeling in my work. I remember growing up, I'm from the south side of Chicago. I was growing up in the 90s, and I grew up undocumented. I'm from Jalisco. I got here when I was 4 years old. I was brought to Chicago. I grew up in the Chicago suburbs, different parts of the south side of Chicago. A lot of that experiences influence my work and what I do. And the feeling that I'm always after is like this morning, waking up when I was like maybe 10, 12 years old and smelling the palo frijoles in the house and listening to my mom and my grandma's hanging out, laughing, my sisters and my cousins fighting for the bathroom, and opening the window and having just voices of my family members. And that feeling, I think, is why a lot of my work gets labeled as community engaged and social practice. I never really even thought of myself as that's like where I sort of navigated my work, but I think I'm just so embedded with family. I love family, I love traditions, and I love my community. And so for me, it's always made sense to create artwork that points towards those topics, and especially issues that affect my community and myself. And then just really quickly, I'll talk a little bit about community and how I kind of relate. But for me, community is, I think I define it as the people and locations that live inside me, in some ways define me, and are embedded in who I am. Also, I guess as an artist, community is as an audience as well, although I always look towards focusing more on community than an audience. So thank you, that was my introduction. I'm going to hand it over to Aram.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here, to be in conversation with Luis and Melanie. My name is Aram Han Sifuentes. I use she and they pronouns. I'm an artist, art educator based in Chicago. And so, I'm going to actually go through some of my slides one by one and kind of talk a little bit about the different kind of projects that I've been doing. So this is Purchase Banner Lending Library. So I've been doing this project since 2016. And the first part of this project are teaching workshops to teach people how to make their own purchase banners. And then the second part of the project are having these libraries where people can check out these banners to use, right? And how that started out for me was that in 2016, I'm an immigrant myself, coming from South Korea, and I wasn't a citizen at the time, and also I do a lot of work working with non-citizen immigrants, predominantly of color, and a lot of people who were also undocumented. And we were making these banners, but not feeling safe to take them out ourselves. And so then that's how the idea of the lending library came about. And so with the next slide, this is an example of banners being used, right? And so the words of these banners have a growing history. They're made by someone, used, returned to the library, and then taken by someone else to be used again. So the banners carry the histories of the hands that's made them, that hold them, and the places where they travel. So in the next slide, you can see, since 2016, more than 3,000 banners have been made in the workshops. And I've started different purchase banner lending libraries all over the United States and internationally as well. This one's in the Netherlands. And yeah, so I've done this project in the US, Canada, Netherlands, Germany, UK. And so in the next slide, you can see a different project. It's pretty linked in terms of, yeah, I'm really interested in arts and visual culture and how how important it is in social and political movements. And really that's like what drew me to Chiapas. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But I wanted to start out showing different works that I made just because like the work that I made for this project is quite, there's a lot of links, but it's quite different as well. And so this is my drumming group, my Korean traditional drumming group called Uitori. And it's called Humor, the traditional drumming. And the drumming historically, traditionally, isn't just about performance, but it's to create a space to celebrate the lives of all individuals and communities and to lift up collective power. And so me and my studio assistant, Erica, I made garments for us in this project called Protest Garment Lab, where I collaborate with artists, fashion designers, and we make all these garments that have hidden protest banners inside of them. And that's like to protect the wearer of the garment, to highlight a moment of transformation, and to embolden the wearers of the garment. So currently, there's over 20 garments. So in the next slide, I'll quickly talk about this project and then talk about the one I did in Chiapas. And so yeah, this is called Citizenship for All, Storytelling Through Nogi Making. And this project's quite new. I started this year. And so with my interest in banners, I've been working with, it's Katie. I've been working with the HANA Center, which is this amazing immigrant justice organization. Our roots are Korean and Korean American. And we're looking at our history of protest banners, specifically to Korean folk traditions, right? And so nogis are Korean folk banners that are used in community gatherings, particularly around harvest and farming. It protects from evil, brings about worldly blessing, and fosters societal harmony. So in the next slide, you can see that I've been facilitating these weekly workshops at HANA Center, asking community members to tell our stories and place their desires, commands, and demands onto the nogi. And the nogi are made in community and they are used by HANA Center. They're used by community, so we use them in gala, celebrations, marches, protests, when meeting with representatives. And in the project, so in these projects you can see I create participatory, active environments where safety, play, and skill sharing are emphasized. And even though many of my projects are collaborative and communal in nature, they also incite and highlight individual experiences, politics, and voice. So this project holds the stories, desires, commands, and demands of the individuals in our community to uplift individual stories and voices and for community efforts for immigrant, racial, and economic justice. And so, yeah, in the next slide, you can see this is the preservers, innovators, rescuers of culture in Chiapas. And so this is the project that is on exhibition and that I got to do for the 2022 Craft Research Fund Artist Fellowship through the Center for Craft. And so I spent 5 months in San Cristobal de las Casas in Chiapas, Mexico, and I had 2 objectives. So number 1, it was really to learn how to backstrap weave. So I've always really wanted to learn how to backstrap weave because you could create such complex textiles with just using some sticks and a belt, right? It's so accessible in that kind of way. And then also that many cultures around the world have abstract weaving, including Korea, right? I really want to learn it in Korea, but it's really really hard to access and learn. And, you know, sometimes as diaspora, sometimes you have to learn another culture to get closer to your own. And then the second objective was to connect with textile artists in the region. So, like I said, my interest in the region started with looking at textiles and the roles they play in political and social movements. So I work with 12 textile artists who are masters in their communities, and many of them are teachers. And I commissioned them to create a textile for 3 months with the only requirement that they need to tell a story and that I would interview them. So in the next slide, you can see this is NG. And so many of the artisanas, they create to sell their works in marketplaces and really don't make much money from their work. They often crank things out that are popular in that moment, right? So this project was very different for most of them. And many artisanas, they tried something new for this project, whether it was trying something new that was an ancient technique that had been lost in their communities, or they tried something conceptually new, which was really exciting as well. So here, Angie created this textile all from brocade, so it's not embroidered, it's like the pattern is made wildly woven, which is incredibly hard to do. And she really was thinking about creating this textile that is like a painting, right? And with the final slide, this one is Ceci. And she created this wool textile that was really nostalgic to one that her parents were making and that she hasn't seen in her community. And so in that way, a lot of people were also like I said, kind of rescuing something that had been lost in their community or something much older. And they would use these words, right? Like, I'm a preserver of culture. I rescued this for my community. And I thought those kind of conversations were really important. And so, yeah, the exhibition has these textiles on display and their interviews where they speak about their lives and their textiles. And to end, so we have a video by Anastasia Juana Gomez Gonzalez, who really the project could not happen without her, because she is the one that was able to connect me to all of these different artisanas in all regions of Chiapas to participate in this project. So she recorded a little video to talk about community, textiles, and cultural preservation, and kind of the state of where textiles are in her community.
Mi nombre es Anastasia Gómez González, soy de Chiapas. Mi carrera artesanal es hecho a mano. Ese conocimiento lo adquirí desde muy pequeña, porque crecí en un mundo de tejedoras donde mi mamá, mi abuela, mis tías, mis primas los veían tejer. Entonces yo de niña jugaba con los hilos, las agujas, todas las herramientas para un telar de cintura. Entonces las mamás asignan un telar a la niña para que empiece a hacer cosas muy pequeñas como bolsas para tortilla, un muestrario muy pequeño para que empiece. Entonces yo así empecé con textiles muy pequeños, porque no podemos cargar textiles muy grandes, entonces es por eso. Antes se le obligaba a las niñas a tejer, porque se decía que si se llegaba a casar a los 13, 14, 15 años, esta niña ya debería de saber tejer para vestir a su esposo, a sus 2 hijos, para vestirse a sí misma, para venta. Entonces, por eso a las niñas se les enseña a tejer. Y yo pienso de que se va a seguir conservando esta práctica artesanal, quizá no mucho como antes, porque hoy en día las niñas ya usan más ropa industrializada, como es el pantalón, la playera y todo eso. Pero yo estoy segura de que se va a seguir conservando esto, porque enseñan a cantar en cada fiesta que hagan, fiestas patronales y fiestas como de boda, bautizo y todo eso. se sigue viendo el textil, se sigue conservando. Y en las señoras más grandes, ellas no usan nada de pantalón ni nada de eso, entonces se va a seguir conservando. Y si se hace promociones culturales, las niñas de las generaciones más pequeñas, yo digo que se van a interesar más para a seguir conservando este patrimonio cultural que se tiene en Sinacantán, no solo en Sinacantán, sino en todos los estados de Chiapas, que tenemos esta riqueza cultural que es el telar de cintura. En todas las comunidades todavía se practica el telar de cintura, y como promotor cultural hay que hacer difusión para que nunca se pierda las técnicas ancestrales, los conocimientos, y lo más importante sería como hacer un registro para que las futuras generaciones tengan donde investigar lo que de sus antepasados, y quizá rescatar algunas técnicas de tejido, de bordado y así. Mi nombre es Anastasia Gómez González, soy de Sinacantán, Chiapas.
That was amazing. Both of you are incredible. I was writing down some notes of what Anna was talking about. Some of the things that stood out to me was this idea of like what it means to be a rebel. I know that like we had this conversation with Anna through Zoom in preparation for this talk, and just thinking about the idea of like how each one of us comes through our practice, influenced by our own lived experiences. Sometimes feel like they're shared experiences, but how even words like community, tradition, and like you were saying, Aram, how like it just means so many different things for us, and we come through it from different, we're accessing tradition through different points. And I'm curious if maybe we could talk a little bit about like where you access that point or what that means to you. If that's okay. I know we also have some predetermined questions as well, but.
Question like how do I access tradition?
Yeah, I think, we were having these conversations, and something that's been interesting for me is that, these words and the context around these practices is so different. And I think so much of what I learned in Chiapas, spending 5 months there, has been that, right? Like this word even craft, or like, talking to these artisanas, and they're not considered artists, right? There's a textile museum there, and like most of the textiles there even don't have their names associated, like the makers associated to it, right? So like even there, they're not often named, right? And then like, how do I negotiate that as like an artist coming in, right? And people, and so like, I think these kind of situations were really interesting, and like, so much of what's happening there in the moment is like, the capitalism, globalization, right? It's making it so hard for a lot of the creatives and makers to continue their practice. Like a lot of them in the interviews talk about how like younger generations don't want to do the weaving because they don't make money. They would make much more money like doing anything else, right? And so they're like, I think that's why a lot of the artisanas I work with, and in the interviews they talk about like, my role is to preserve culture, right? And my role is, and like just this simple task of like these 3 months of creating something, whatever they wanted to. And in a way, they like, some of them treated it like their own little artist residency, right? To create something that like, and some of them were like Anna, she was like, oh, I knew exactly what I wanted to make because I've been thinking about this for a long time. Like she saw a photo of herself with this shawl from Zina Gatan that's like red and pink and completely different colors because she's in a community that changes their colors twice a year. And so she was like, I've never seen one that color, and I knew I wanted to create one of that color to rescue the colors of the past, because they also don't have this kind of practice of archiving or collecting, right? She's like, we just sell them if we don't use them anymore. But then so much has gotten lost because we don't have access to that. And that's what she's talking about in her interview now, right? If there's like an archive, if there's like some kind of place that's like keeping that, then we can access that as a community, right? And so, yeah, it was really interesting in those sorts of ways, and I think, so interesting to think about like these paradoxes in context. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Some of the things that I'm right down to talk about. I love what I respond to the most, I think, is this idea of agency, right? Because for me, like growing up in a predominantly white suburb, brown, undocumented, I come into tradition as a way to try to return to an ancestral home, to feel connected. You know, I talked about earlier about my experience just growing up in family. So my relationship to these traditions, I kind of get to decide like what they mean to me and how I access them. And in turn, you know, with Anna, I remember her talking again through our Zoom, and the conversation here is where like they are masters at their craft, yet they're sort of also bounded by it because, you know, I remember her talking specifically about these patterns that, you know, they need to create these certain patterns because certain patterns mean certain things, that they're so embedded in the community that in some ways, and I don't want to put words there, so maybe, you know, please correct me, but it feels like it's, you're not honoring correctly, or, you know, also the conversations, you know, it's like very gender, it's like little girls are going to learn that, you know, there's tradition, but I think there's also this hope for her that they're like being a rebel and breaking away from tradition. I think that's, you know, tradition could both be something to celebrate, but it's also a burden in times as well. And that was just really interesting. I mean, I remember, I don't know if I could finish this thought, but I remember her just talking about like she couldn't ride a bike, right? Like, because little girls don't ride bikes in those towns. Maybe you could,
Yeah, she's very unique and known as being like a rebellious woman in her community because she has a job at the Textile Museum. She has an education. She's in her 30s and not married with children. She is one of the only women, I believe she told me she's one of the only women who actually drive in her community. And so, and so she kind of, you know, is rebellious in that way. And I think that's also, those in the interviews, because they're all artisanas, they're all women, they talked a lot about like women's rights and how that comes across in the textiles and how it's really a feminist practice. Like Ceci, who I showed you a picture of at the end, she in hers was talking about how the stories that she interprets from her communities and Bresler, she's like, they speak to me about gender equality. And so I think that's really interesting and powerful as well. Very important to this conversation. But it's interesting to talk about like tradition, because it's obviously so, like, the context is very clear what tradition means when you're in a community, like, you know, for Anna or any of these artisanas. But for us as diaspora, I think it's quite interesting too, because like you were saying, like, there's these both sides of tradition and culture, where sometimes like there's strict rules and there's, you know, but for the thing, you know, like the last projects I was showing you with the nogis, like Korean folk traditions and culture really influenced my practice. And it's been really amazing to work with Hana Center, who also the base of their Korean American organization. And to have this conversation all the time is like, hey, we're diaspora. Like we can be inspired by our tradition, but we can also really decide to make it our own, right? And I really like that, and I really like being in that space with other Korean Americans who kind of agree. Like we're like, hey, we don't have to like use those kind of honorifics with each other anymore. Like we're diaspora. We can let some of like the toxic parts of our culture go, you know? And so I really find that liberating. And I really find, you know, in a lot of like ways of talking about like immigrants and diaspora, a lot of the ways that people talk about it is like, I don't belong there or here, right? And I really don't like that. Because I think, I mean, there's obviously some reality to it, but I think there's like an exciting space where we could really make the space that we're in our own, and really like we can use our traditions from here and mix it and do this and that with it, and then like really make our own identity, right? And I think that's why I'm like so inspired by like Chicano literature and Chicanismo, because it really is like, no, we're not Mexican, we're not American, we're Mexican American, and that's exactly what like this cultural identity and, you know, this culture is. Yeah. How does this influence your practice?
Like that, thanks. Yeah, I mean, yes to all of that, right? But I think like, you're right, I was exactly thinking about Chicanx histories, Gloria Saldua, and you know, like the concept of nepakla, which means this in-between, right? It's a Mexicana word for this in-betweenness that people find yourselves in, where you cross the border. So thinking of the border as this wound that we can navigate. I think though, I don't know for you, but for me, it took a long time to really, in some ways that's like liberation, right? Like to be able to function in a space that with people around you that doesn't look like you, that don't have your culture, and just be like, I am gonna be whatever I want, right? I call it like being like the ultimate shapeshifter. Like I could be Mexican today, I could be like hood tomorrow, I could be Chicanx, you know, I could do anything I want, because I'm so used to being other that I've taken that power away, right? I've reclaimed it. And I think that's not easy to do, at least it wasn't easy for me, but I think through art and through making and through connecting is what has given me the strength to be able to persevere through all of that, you know. And it can be also very isolating as well, in the sense of like making artwork that's about your culture, and like it feels like it's the wave of these things being celebrated, but you know, I've been doing this for like plus years, and these, you know, all of a sudden I'm doing talks about what it means to be undocumented, or the aesthetics of undocumentedness. And it's so bizarre to me that for so long I had to hide that part of me out of fear and harm. And now it's like, let's talk about it in front of a lot of people. You know, it's like, yeah, it's interesting. It's a big shift.
Okay, so in a moment we will turn the mic over to you all, the audience, and get some questions for you, but I would like to just start off the questions with some of my own that I have. Okay, so in terms of cultural preservation, you know, both of you kind of, I know, you know, Ron, your project and research is directly tied to cultural preservation, and Louise, you also, you know, work, you know, along the lines of cultural preservation. So just to kind of go further into what that means, what is the role, or what do you think the role of the artist is as far as cultural preservation goes? And maybe how does that show up in your work?
Yeah, I think it's, I don't know if I have an answer for it, you know, what the role of an artist is, but I have like different kind of personal experiences, right? And so yeah, the artisanas here in Chiapas are like, I preserve culture, right? And that's like very clear and really impressive. And also like that it comes down to like individual power. I think that's something that I witnessed and learned so much of there. And for me, I think, yeah, making work that is like where I am looking at traditions of Korean culture, Mexican culture, right? And then how does that influence my practice? Like right now with the Nongi project, look, you know, I did all this research and also like technical research and explorations about traditional folk banners. And I was really surprised because I had a lot of participants come in who are like from very recently from Korea. And even, you know, one of the sessions, so it's like a 4-day long session that people commit to like make their own donki. And the first one is kind of going over the history of the donki and talking about like its spiritual properties. And it's interesting because a lot of like people are like, I never knew about donki. You know, even the people coming from Korea. And I think like as I express, sometimes I have like kind of a chip on my shoulder because I'm like, I don't really know, right? Or like I don't have the same kind of access, right, that I would if I was in Korea, or like if I knew how to read and write Korean much better, right? And so like I have to like find things in English or get help. And yeah, so then sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't really know that I'm getting like these cultural traditional facts correct. And then hearing people like coming from Korea and they're like, hey, I've never heard about Nongi. Wow, I've learned so much from you, you know? And I'm like, oh, really? You know? And so I think that that's really, you know, like something I've been learning. How about you, Luis? I know that you have been really diving into like Curanismo right now, right? So can you talk a little bit about that? And, yeah.
Thank you. Lovely segue. This question it's exciting for me because I'll touch a little bit, if it's okay, about this whole idea of preserving. For me, as like, it's kind of important for myself to always remind myself that I'm an artist first. And what that means to me is like, for me, when I think about preserving culture, like that's too heavy. Like, you know, I don't want that role. If that's what it ends up being, sure. But you know, I was talking about conserving culture, and that feels like a little softer, you know, because preserving sort of makes me feel like a gatekeeper or like safeguarding something. And what I love about being an artist is that like I get to decide again like what type of artist I want to be in the studio. Like I want to play. I want to like the artist for me. The role is to just like you know mess some shit up and figure it out and be free and that I think is really incredible that we get to do that. You know, like the role of the artist is play. You know, a lot of my work comes from working through a sense of joy and healing. And I think I don't like, you know, I think like being a person of color, like there's a lot of pressure as an artist to always be, it's like that little pin you gave me, right? It was talking about like, we sort of become like the know-all of our cultures, and like we don't know, like we're figuring it out, you know. And I want to keep it that way. There's a freedom to that, and so you know, you mentioned curanderismo. Curanderismo is referred to as the three-headed serpent because it's an indigenous philosophy of healing that's based from West Africa, from Spanish, and from the indigenous cultures from the Americas. And it is born out of the immense healing that was happening after colonization. And the reason, like I like to say, you know, that I'm an artist that uses curanderismo as a blueprint for what I do. And I've been able to create artwork in a way that has been just very joyful for me, learning about my community. So I do portraits where there are healing ceremonies for individuals in my community, and we work a lot with like, what do we carry in our bodies from, you know, white supremacy, from capitalism, all ism basically, and basically like suffering, like where in our bodies is our suffering happening, and how does that translate into different diseases, especially in like Black and brown communities, right? Like it could certain type of trauma, like susto or BDs, and like rage, these very specific sort of spiritual diseases that affect our bodies. And I'm really interested in like what it means to use drawing and art and making as a way to facilitate healing. Because I already believe that when you're making art, you're tapping into a flow, and for me that flow is the divine, and whatever we want to call it. So it just makes perfect sense for me to be like, what would it mean to go somewhere else, or questions like, that I get people, I don't know if people say this anymore, but it's like, wow, you want to put your heart and soul into this piece, what does that actually mean? Or like, what if I actually put something else? Like, what if I put my liver in it? What does that mean? What if I put, like, I don't know, what if I stop trying to make for my mind and I make for my hand? Like, what do my hands want to make today? How does my back want to feel today? And how can making make it feel like? So just kind of like really like thinking like the wisdom that our body carries, and how can we translate that into art making, art practice. And it's very different than like curanderismo, where you're going to go to someone to do these rituals for you to create healing. I'm still exploring, and I'm playing, and I'm finding what works and what doesn't, and I love that space. Like, I don't want to be an expert in anything. I just want to play, be joyful.
Okay, well, thank you, Aram and Louise. I do want to open it up to the audience and students and faculty and community members. If you all have some questions for Aram and Louise, please feel free to, there's a mic over here at the end, and we're going to open it up for questions if you have any. And I know there's a lot of pressure to come up here and speak at the mic, but if you want, you can also just speak, ask your questions openly from your seat if you feel more comfortable. Oh, okay.
Yeah, we have a break.
Sound good?
Yes.
Okay. This is a question for Aram. I noticed that one of the things that struck me the most when I was seeing your work up here on the slides was the usage of text, which makes sense that you're making a lot of banners. Do you think that the usage of text and written words is part of your art? How does that inform it? Are you trying to seek clarity? Is it stating purpose? Mm-hmm. And what kind of things can you think of doing that doesn't involve written text?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for that. Yeah, text becomes really important in my practice. A lot of times because it is about clarity, right? And it is about like speaking oftentimes as impacted people. Yeah, it's about like, well, with protests, right? Like, it's hard to have a banner that doesn't have text, right? Because you want to be like as clear as possible. Like, what are we fighting against, right? And so, in a lot of ways, that functions in the same way, and why text becomes really important for me. And also with the Nogi too, historically they have text on there because it was about communicating them to the gods. That's why their like format is so long, is because it's like we're throwing our commands and demands and desires into the sky for the gods. And it was text-based as well. And so, yeah, I tend to go back to text a lot because a lot of times just, like I said, clarity, yeah. There's like no abstraction in like what we're trying to say. I mean, that words can be abstract as well, but yeah, just being as clear as possible.
I'm terrified to go for the microphone, so everyone can hear me. This is same here. So you said something really interesting about like negotiating like nameless textiles, like going into a museum and seeing these pieces that like have nobody in particular associated with them. So I have like, two parts to this question. Number one is if the weavers that you were staying with, if you found that they were interested in being individually represented or like part of their cultural preservation, this idea was being a part of the community, and then also like both of you could reflect on this idea of like, I personally feel in the US we're very, very obsessed with our personal identity, but we're also obsessed with the community. So it's kind of these two things that are sometimes competing with each other, and I'm curious y'all's thoughts on the idea of art being an individual, being a community, like these different things.
Could you try to repeat the question?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to repeat the question. I'll condense it. So the first question being about, how a lot of the work by these artisanas are unnamed, and if they have the desire to be named. I think like in, I'll also say the second question before I start. And the second question being about kind of negotiating like identity and community, right? And if those are separate, if they come together, more or less, is that right? Okay, cool. So the first question, I think I'll answer both together actually, because like in most non-Euro-Western cultures, like art is not made by an individual, right? And it isn't named like that as well, right? So I think like culturally, historically, in a lot of these practices, like in Korea and Nongis as well, they're made by community and never named, right? But I think over time, and the same I think in Chiapas. So I think historically, there hasn't been that like desire for an artist to say like, I am the individual name needs to be named. But I think definitely like over time, people have seen the importance of that, right? And so they do want to be named. And I think that's so much of like what I'm trying to do with this exhibition at the Center for Craft is like, not only just to name them and their pieces, but to really, that's why the interviews became so important, so that they were seeing, like the artists are talking about their own works, right? And like, I really haven't seen much of that in the world, right? And so, when we're looking at, Indigenous makers, right? It doesn't happen very often. So like that was really important for me to do. How do you navigate individual and community?
Thank you. I was just really taking in what you were saying about individuality and community. How do I respond to that? I mean, I don't know. It makes me just think about sometimes, and now I'm just speaking to the question, this isn't about the question or anything in general, about community versus individualism. Oftentimes, like there's sort of these myths or preconceived notions of Indigenous practices and the community being so strong. But I think that we can't define a group by what we think of, like we're more than that. And I think you can celebrate your individualism and still be in community and celebrate both. But I think that's all I can really add to that, because I think often, there's these concepts of, like I remember, I'm also an educator, and I used to work with K-12 students, and there'd be a lot of just like educators finding ways to interact with students and be like, Indigenous folks, like, they like to sit in circles because that's community. Everyone did sit in a circle. Right? You know what I mean? Like, it's like these kind of like, and people mean well, but there's also just kind of this idea of like over embellishing ways of being or epistemologies, and like we're constantly shifting and changing. You know, again, going back to power, we get to decide, you know, how we function as an individual and how we function collectively. Yeah. Any other questions?
My name is Shunyu, and I'm from China. I'm a community member in Asheville. I have two questions for both of y'all. One is, what does your heart pray for today? And what do your hands want to make today? Imagine if you have the rest of the day to yourself. What would you like today? Thank you.
That's such a beautiful question. I want to start crying. What does my heart need? My heart needs a lot of peace right now. There's so much heaviness and, you know, genocide happening, brown folks getting killed. And I'm sorry to bring it up so like that, but it's happening in a way it's really heavy, and it's very difficult to, as someone who already works with like thinking of how colonization affects our bodies 500 years ago, and feeling that destruction has just been really heavy and difficult. And what I also think is really important to just, you know, find these pockets of joy and sharing and being in a community like this. So I think my heart just wants a little bit of peace and tranquility. My hands want to draw. That's more specific. I love drawing, and I want to draw. I'm drawing on with the sketchboard. Yeah, like that brings me a lot of joy. So I know, like the moment I grab a pencil and a piece of paper and that sound, like, and discovering new things. I don't know what I want to discover. Like that for me is like my joy and my peace. So that's such a lovely question. Thank you.
Yeah, that's really a beautiful question. Yeah, I what my heart wants is also peace as a verb, right? I would want. I think what I really want that, I've been talking about this because I'm an educator, and something I've witnessed in my students this past semester has been so challenging is like people really seem like they've lost hope that things can change. And so I really want, and I can see why, right? I think I'm also there in some ways, right? But like I really want hope in my heart. And I think that's something that also really drives my practice is that, you know, like these systems of oppression really make us suffer by ourselves, and it really isolates us. And I think that's why I make these community projects and so we could talk about it and we could realize like, dang, like we might be oppressed in different ways, but like we're not alone, you know? And that's what gives me hope, and I want more hope in the world. And what I want to spend my day doing is making is I want to dance, make movement, right? Yeah, let's go dancing. Where should I go dancing? Where's the spot, right? Serve a craft, I guess. Come Friday at 7 o'clock, opening? 5 to 7. That's where the dance party is going to be at. Movement exercises, yeah? Let's do it.
Is it Saturday?
On Friday. Yeah.
All right, everyone. Well, that's our talk. Thank you for attending today's craft research talk. To learn more about Aram's research, as Aram mentioned, please join us this Friday for the exhibition opening of Preservers, Innovators, and Rescuers of Culture in Chiapas, as well as the opening of Hammer and Hope, another Craft Research Fund Artist Fellowship exhibition and Connections in the Making. And if you're interested in learning more or applying to any of the center's grants programs, please visit our website, or you can catch me after this program. Thank you.